Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for joining our webinar today. Hey, Clay, how are you? Actually, have people with screens today, which is awesome. So today we're going to talk to you about Spotfire performance. So Kelly, if you can go to the next slide. So my name is Phil Unger. I'm the president and CEO of Cadeon. With me today, I have Amanda Summers. Amanda, say hi.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be
And
here today.
And our main presenter today is Kelly Blair, our certified
Hello.
trainer and data specialist. Kelly, say hello to everyone coming in here. Got a bunch of
Hi,
folks coming
everybody.
in.
Good to see you all. Well, be with you all. Let's put it that way.
Absolutely. So before we start, if we go to the next slide,
Yep.
we just a couple of announcements. So for all the folks on the call, just wanted to let you know that Spotfire version 14.5 should be coming out this month. So that's what we've been told. Hopefully by the end of May, there will be 14.5. But 14.5 is actually a point release. It's not the LTS. So unfortunately, the LTS, which is 14.6 now, is scheduled for later this year. So from that perspective, so I know there's been a bunch of folks that have been waiting for the upgrade. And I guess the other thing to add is version 12, they've actually extended support for version 12 now. So version 12 will be supported into 2026. So I guess that's helpful. And maybe that's because version 14.5 and 14.6 have been delayed. Another thing to announce is some of us will be attending the Spotfire Energy Forum May 20th in Houston, Texas. For anybody that's in the industry, oil and gas industry, if you're interested to know more about Spotfire Energy Forum, please reach out. And I could even put the link in the chat if anybody is interested as to when the Spotfire Energy Forum is. This is the premier energy Spotfire event of the year. It's hosted by Michael O'Connell, but a lot of the Spotfire brass will be in attendance there. So you will see Stephen Schneider, Mark Lockwood, Dean Weiner, who leads the account executive team, and his whole team will be there. It is the premier Spotfire event, I would say, of the year. We're hoping to do something similar in Canada in July timeframe. So stay tuned if you're in Canada, Calgary specifically. Stay tuned for an announcement about that sometime, probably during Stampede, is what I'm thinking. Next thing to talk about is there is a new service pack coming for TDV. One of the things Kelly's going to talk about today is TDV. TDV 8.8.1 will be available. And we did get a glimpse of the roadmap for data virtualization from Spotfire. It is still called TIPCO Data Virtualization. Originally, we thought it was going to be renamed to Spotfire Data Virtualization, but it is actually still called TIPCO Data Virtualization from a branding consistency perspective. Kelly's going to tell you a little bit more about that in her presentation. And then finally, and it's nice to see all the people rolling in. We're 48 people now, which is awesome. Our next webinar, and we'll talk a little bit more about the webinar series, but our next webinar will be in June, and that's actually going to be June the 5th. So this is an exciting one. We actually have a new partnership with a company called Data and More, and this is around data. I'll call it data governance, data privacy, data risk as well. So there's a way to do a risk assessment using their software for things like, are you AI ready? What is your risk if you were to go live with Copilot, those types of things. So more to come on that. That's it for me. I'll turn it over to Amanda now, and she'll take you through what we're doing today. Amanda?
Thank you, Phil. And yeah, a lot of people wonder why are we hosting this specific webinar and this topic today? Through different conversations with clients over the last few months, doing different office hours and seeing where some of our clients are struggling or need additional support is all around the performance. So we kind of polled and tasked, and some of you have even been involved, and so we decided on this topic. And obviously, visualization performers are one of the main challenges we see, whether it's how do you load it, how do you build it, how can you better optimize it, even the visualization from a user experience perspective. So Kelly is going to share that with us today. And next slide, please, Kelly. Just real quick, for those of you that may not work directly with Cadeon, but are here through another invite, just one slide on our background. And we are a Spotfire Tier 1 partner. We are the only partner in Canada as well, but we do operate across North America. So we've got clients all over, ranging in all different industries. But Cadeon itself has been operating for over 17 years. We're actually on our 18th year. So very proud to be there. We're often supporting over 100 clients at a time. And again, they are across North America. So we really do what we are is we're specialized in boutique in terms of everything data and AI around the analytics space. And that includes our governance, our risk compliance, our architecture, our visualizations, visual data science, the security aspects of that. We can work with clients. Most recently, we completed a ML and AI model for implementation into Snowflake, Databricks, and into Fabric. So we've been really delving into the ML and AI space. We also focus on data virtualization, which Kelly will talk a little bit about today as well. And then we'll share a little bit of our training and support specifically around Spotfire. So with that, I will hand it over to Kelly.
All right. Thank you so much, Amanda and Phil. And hello, everybody. I'm excited to be here and glad to see we've got so many people joining us. I want to talk a little bit about what I'm going to be covering through this, I guess, the next 45 to 50 minutes, hopefully leaving some time at the end for some questions. We're going to talk a little bit about Spotfire and performance, well, actually a lot about Spotfire and performance. One of the most common challenges that we see, as Amanda was mentioning, is around performance. It's not uncommon to have a dashboard that can take 15, 20, even 30 minutes to load because of data and various other factors can impact that as well. And so we spend a lot of time trying to help our clients with performance. And I've seen this across the board. I've been working with Spotfire close to 10 years now, and performance has definitely gotten to be a challenge. So around that, we're going to talk a little bit about why that would be, talk about network latency a little bit, but kind of really focused on, what is it we're trying to bring into Spotfire to visualize, and that's usually the root of the issues. And within that, we're going to look at some things that we might be able to do at the data source. Also, what we can do with maybe a middleware layer between the data source and Spotfire with data virtualization. In this case, we're going to be focused on TDV, or as I have it listed on the slide here, ADS. It's pretty much one and the same. It's just if it's licensed just for consumption by Spotfire, it's called ADS. If it's can be used by other applications, it's licensed a bit differently and it's called TDV, but they are the same product. And then we're going to look at some things that we can do in Spotfire. I'm going to focus my demonstration pieces around Spotfire here, just to be mindful of the time and everything that goes along with that. So also going back and forth between the slides and the live environment can be a bit tricky. So I'm going to kind of hold off to the demonstration pieces towards the end. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. And that's the plan for the rest of this hour. So first thing, let's talk a little bit about the type of environment that we might be in. So when we're dealing with analytics and Spotfire, and we're looking at bringing in data, you have to start with data. Our data is usually somewhere out on the network, right? We may have database sources. We may have REST APIs that we're consuming data from. We may have data that's on-prem. It may be in the cloud. It may be housed in our own environment. It may be from an external source. There's a whole range of options that from where the data may come from. We can then bring that in directly into Spotfire, our data analytics piece over here at the other end. but quite often it's possible to have some type of middleware in between there. That's going to be our data virtualization layer. So I want to talk about performance in the context of these kind of three areas, the sources, virtualization, and then the analytics piece at the end. All right, so really what a big part of what surrounds all this is the network latency. There can be certainly the characteristics of the network, and I'm not going to get into that in much detail here. It's not like we're going to be able to go in and install brand new fiber network or something like that. But the idea being that there is going to be a delay in the time that it takes for the data to travel from that source into Spotfire. So sometimes when you do go to open up your dashboard and it takes 15, 30 minutes, however long it takes to, hopefully it doesn't take too much longer than that. I have worked with a couple of clients where there was one, and I don't know how he left it sitting there for that long. It would have driven me nuts, but it took 3 days for the dashboard to load. There were issues there. So, but it's not uncommon for it to take time to bring it in. Sometimes we're dealing with data sources that have millions upon millions of rows of data. So that volume of data, the number of rows, can have a big impact on the time that it takes for the dashboard to load. The other thing you have to think about, and I myself am guilty of not always thinking about this. Used to always be focused on rows. Oh, I'm going to bring in, I'm going to reduce the number of rows by 50%. That's going to improve the time. But the other thing you have to think about is it's not just the rows, but it's also the number of columns. If you have 100 columns in your data source and you're only going to be working with, say, a quarter of those, maybe 25 of them in your dashboard, we don't need to bring all 100 columns of those 10 million rows of data or whatever it might be into Spotfire. We can focus in on the specific columns that we need, and that is going to significantly reduce the volume of data. So don't think just rows, but think columns as well. The main point here being bring in just the data that you need. Be judicious. It might be tempting to say, well, if I bring everything in, then, if I, 2 months down the road need to build another visualization and I need that column, it's going to be there. But you might not ever get to that point. You might not need to do that. And maybe you'll decide to put that into a different dashboard altogether. So try and be focused on just the data that you need in terms of both rows and the columns. The other thing to think about is also the timing. It's not just the volume and the speed that it takes for the data to load, but when does it happen as well. So especially when we get into some caching strategies, that's going to factor in quite a bit. So potentially we might want to cache some data or schedule an update in a web player and cache the whole dashboard into the server memory. And instead of doing that in the middle of the day, maybe we do that in the early morning hours and kind of reduce the impact on the network, because it's not, again, just our application as well. It could be, the data source could be getting hit up a lot more during the course of business hours. So if we can kind of shift some of our timing to outside of those prime times, that can definitely help as well. Now, I'm going to briefly talk about the data source, but our focus here is going to be more on the pieces that we have control of, and in particular Spotfire. But the main thing here to understand, whether we are initiating this from the Spotfire side, which we're going to see an option for that when we get into the demonstration later on, but whether it's, whether we're making this happen from the source and pushing it down, the request down to the source, or we're doing things directly at the source, we really want to just bring in only the required data across the network. So let's reduce that volume, and that's going to greatly speed things up. That's going to also reduce the burden on the source. It's going to free up the network for other uses, and it's going to get that data more quickly into Spotfire so that we can get our dashboard loaded and our questions answered in a much more timely fashion. So going back to what I talked about on the previous slide, looking at reducing the number of rows, reducing the number of columns, we kind of, the key here, as it says on the last bit, is reduce, reduce, reduce. So can we filter the rows? Instead of doing select every row, let's maybe add a where clause. And for those of you that may not be familiar with SQL terms, it's basically just a way to limit the number of rows that are coming back. So we can filter those rows, bring in just the rows that we need. Especially think about it, if you are going to be opening up a dashboard and then you don't care about half the data that's there and you filter it out right away, why spend the time bringing it into Spotfire? Let's shorten that load time and bring in just the data that we need. And by that same token, limit the columns. Instead of a select asterisk or select all, let's list the specific columns that we need. So there may be some things that you can do at the source to help with that. We might also be able to aggregate. If I just need some high-level summary information, I have a couple of strategies I can use. One, I can bring all that data into Spotfire, and then within Spotfire, perform the logic to aggregate and go from there. But potentially, it's taken some time to get that data in, so I might be able to push that aggregation down to the source. The DB then can aggregate the data and just send me the results. And I have an example that I'm going to demonstrate a little bit later on that. But main thing here, reduce, reduce, reduce. Let's shorten, reduce the amount of data, shorten those load times coming in. So, if we're still focused at the source, it's possible, depending upon whether or not you have control over it or have access to the DBA who might have control over that. You might be able to create some specialized views at the source. That there's some advantages to doing that. It allows us to potentially promote reusability. Let's say that you have the same kind of set of data that you need for maybe 2 different dashboards. Well, if both dashboards bring all that data across the network and then use the same thing, but then sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But let's say you bring that data across and then you're going to filter it for both of those dashboards. Well, you're kind of doubled up that. So maybe we can create a view at the source that incorporates that where clause so that we can just pull that in. So that's going to allow us to reuse those assets at the source. It also allows us to do some standardization. If we need to do some transformation of the data, that can be done once at the source and then shared across those multiple dashboards. Spotfire will allow you to do that, and some of you may be familiar with the data canvas and have been able to add rows and add columns and do transformations in Spotfire. And believe me, that is something that I love about Spotfire, because if I can't do it at the source, I know I can do some things in Spotfire. But we want to think about what is the right tool for the job. Just because we can join the data in Spotfire doesn't mean that's where we want to do it. It may not be the best place to do it. We might get better performance gains by doing that at the source and then leveraging that across multiple dashboards. Really, our goal here, if we're trying to optimize things, is to push as much processing to that underlying source as possible. The other thing, let me go back for it. Let me kind of build on that. So one of the things that may happen though is we may not have a lot of control over that source data. It may be coming from an external source outside of the organization. It may be from a partner. It may be, from some published database that we do consume for our visualizations, but it may not be something that we have a lot of control over. So with that in mind, we can introduce a middleware layer here. In this case, we're looking at ADS, a TDV/ADS, so TIBCO data virtualization. If it's licensed for use exclusively with Spotfire, it's called ADS, Advanced Data Services. That ADS version of it does not limit your ability to consume sources. It just limits the options for consuming the published resources coming from TDV/ADS. So that's going to allow us to potentially create the views there. If we can't create it at the source, we can bring it into ADS, create our custom view in there. It provides another opportunity for us to be able to go in and standardize formats and things like that, or potentially apply transformations. If we have any calculations that we want to do. Now, again, if we can do those at the source, that's certainly another option, but it isn't always an option. So bringing it into ADS allows us to potentially more efficiently perform those calculations. Now, again, that's something that Spotfire can do. Hopefully, if you've worked with Spotfire, you're probably familiar with the fact that you can add your own calculated columns, and that is absolutely one of my. I have a lot of favorite features about Spotfire, but there's kind of three top features, and the ability to create those calculations, and in particular, do custom expressions is one of my top three favorite things. But again, from a performance perspective, it may not be the right choice. So we want to kind of think about all of the different places where we can optimize and improve our dashboard load times, because that's all well and good if you've got the best dashboard ever, but if it takes half an hour to load, your users who need to get their answers quickly may find a different way to get those answers. So pushing those calculations to potentially the source, if that's an option, but if not, ADS is another place where we can do that. ADS also has some tools like package queries that would allow you to push a query directly down to the source using its language specific features. So Spotfire doesn't necessarily give us the ability to we can create custom queries using our data connections and information links, but we can't necessarily use source specific language and hints. So TDV ADS is going to give us an opportunity to do that.
Kelly, just a quick question for you.
Yes.
I'm curious, do we talk at all about, the connectivity to cloud sources? Because we have so many software as a service packages nowadays, and, some people still have stuff on-prem, and then there's even spreadsheets. I mean, a lot of our customers that are on the journey still have spreadsheets. Do you talk at all about how ADS is helping to manage that hybrid architecture, I'll call it?
It's a perfect question, Phil. Everybody listening, you might think we planned this, but we didn't. That was literally just an improv question there, but that is exactly what I was going to talk about next. So oftentimes our data is not in a single source, right? To Phil's point, that data may be in the cloud. It may be in different formats. We may have an Oracle database and a Postgres database. We might have an Excel spreadsheet. So we may have a lot of different sources. So in that case, optimizing at the source is a bit of a challenge, right? Because it's not a single source. That's where another role that's another role that TDV can play, because it allows us to create these federated joins, basically joining data from multiple sources. So that can be a very time-consuming process in Spotfire. Yeah, again, we can do it in Spotfire, but TDV or ADS, I'll use those two terms somewhat interchangeably, is going to provide a platform that is going to allow us to bring in all those different sources. And you can see here, I have 3 different views, which could be from the same source or could potentially be from different sources. And I can then bring those in, combine those together, and then that's going to provide another opportunity to optimize, because I might be able to cache at that level, which we'll talk about in a moment. Also, the TDV excuse me, the TDV engine has a query optimizer. So it is very well designed to kind of decompose these multi-source federated joins and find the most optimal way to do that. Good example. So both from looking at different sources, but also applying some intelligence to the process. So TDV will allow us to work with, you can enable cardinality statistics, which basically allows you to kind of do some indexing of that source and understanding the values that are there. So let's say, for example, that you want to join data from 2 different sources. And one of those views that you're wanting to join, and I'm just going to take extreme numbers here, but let's say it's going to limit the results down to maybe 10 different values. And you're going to be querying that against a much larger database that maybe could potentially return 10 million rows, and you're going to join those together. If we were to look at doing this in, say, first of all, if these are 2 different sources, we can't really handle that at the source. If it's a single source, we might be able to join that at the source and then pull that custom view into Spotfire, or maybe go through TDV. If we're looking at Spotfire's option is to bring that data in, and that's an oversimplification, but let's say that Spotfire, we'd be looking at bringing that in and doing the join there, and maybe we're going to do an inner join or a left outer join, or that's going to limit those results. Well, if we have to still bring all 10 million rows across the network into Spotfire and then take the time to load that, that's going to be a bit of an issue. TDV, we still might have to bring that across the network into TDV, of course, but we're going to be able to have it more efficiently perform that join. So if you've got one small table, one larger table, there is a more efficient way to do it. The query optimizer can work on kind of two different things. There are kind of best practices that can be factored into the optimizer, kind of general, best practice rules, and then those cardinality statistics that will allow it to figure out the best way to perform that, the most efficient way to execute that query. All right, so the other advantage to that also is that we can bring it into TDV and then we can cache it, meaning that we can bring it into TDV once, do whatever work that we have in there, and then we can cache it within TDV's environment. And TDV provides some different mechanisms for this. We can potentially kind of just go with the default and it uses its own database for doing that, or you can set up a separate database to enable the caching on that. But generally speaking, unless you get into some of those more complex situations like that second one, just going with the default, you might even consider it one-click caching. You can see here in TDV, if I've created a resource and I want to cache it, whether it's a single source or multi-source resource, I can just literally click on this button here, create cache, and it will then create that cache for me. So it's very easy to enable. And then once you've done that, you can then schedule how often do you want to refresh it. Once we get into caching, the conversation is going to turn a little bit to finding the optimal balance between performance and the freshness of the data. So if we've got our cache there, but we haven't refreshed that cache in, let's go extreme here, let's say a month, well, that data is probably pretty stale. And if you're looking at your latest production values or sales figures or whatever, you don't want the information from last month. You want the information from last week or maybe even yesterday or maybe even today. So the scheduling options here, you can either kind of do it on demand manually, or you can schedule it at one time in the future, or probably the most common thing that we'll see is that it's scheduled periodically. Let's refresh it, in this case, once a week. You can schedule it what day and time you want. So in this case, it's scheduled for about a week ago at 3 a.m. And then it's just going to repeat that cache every week. Again, timing matters. So if we go back to that discussion, this is going to give us another place where we can kind of work with the timing and potentially do things at an hour that is less critical to the overall health of our network or whatever it is that we are doing. So now, if you have a lot of caches going on, that can get a little bit tricky. ADS does offer the ability to create cache policies so that it can help manage these. You can otherwise look at it and say, well, I think that cache A will take half an hour. So I'm going to have cache B start at, instead of 3 a.m., 3:35 a.m. And you can do that. But I've done that a few times here and there. And invariably, a cache will take longer. And so it can stack up a little bit. The cache policy feature really allows you to optimize that process. The other thing that we can do here in ADS is kind of look at some other strategies around caching, potentially doing incremental caching or partitioning, where you can break up your data into different groups, or through the partitioning, or incrementally, if you have some type of column that will indicate when a change has occurred, you only then update those ones that have changed. So if you have data that changes at different rates, kind of thinking along those lines, like if we're looking at production types of things, the history of production, let's say I'm looking at, what the current year is. Well, at the end of this current year, I'm pretty certain the caching from this past year, or the production from this past year, isn't going to change. So I don't need to keep refreshing, if I'm pulling in that historical data, maybe I don't need to pull in, keep refreshing last year's. That can be somewhat static. And then the ongoing current year or current month or current week, whatever process you want to use as your partitioning strategy there will allow you a lot more flexibility. So using a data virtualization tool, whether it's ADS or others, there are others that are out there as well, is going to give us more flexibility to really optimize this process of making sure that we have data as fresh as we need it, but still keeping that balance with performance. One other thing I want to mention around the ADS caching piece, if your data comes from a REST API or REST data source, you can implement that in Spotfire. I've done it, but it often can be slow and can be a little bit of a challenge to implement in Spotfire. So this is where ADS, or whatever data virtualization tool you're using, can help with that, because you can easily query the data through a REST API, cache it in your data virtualization piece, and then that's going to simplify bringing it into Spotfire at that point. All right, so that's a little bit of the background on that. As a quick note, I wasn't really doing much demonstrations on that. I'm noticing that we are halfway through, so I want to be judicious in our time use, just like we're going to be judicious in the volume of data that we're bringing across the network. And I do want to show you a few things specifically in Spotfire. That said, I'm just going to make a brief mention here, and I know we'll circle back to it at the end, though, that we do have a class, a new class that we have put together on performance in Spotfire, where we dig into some of those other things a little bit deeper. Here, my focus on the hands-on pieces is going to be on the Spotfire piece. So just like we have caching options available in TDV, we also have some cache options available in Spotfire. So this could be your data loading settings, the ability. So I'm going to go through a couple of these. So I am going to exit from my full screen. Let's see if I can get back here. I know it doesn't look quite as pretty, but it's going to allow me to get into my Spotfire environment. So I want to talk about a couple of options around this. So let's get into my Spotfire environment. And in here, I have a dashboard that's mocked up. And before I get too deep into the caching pieces, I want to revisit that idea of bringing only the data across the network that you need. So I have a very simple dashboard here. And if you look here, I have just this, it's some sales figures. I'm using the, a public database for training, AdventureWorks. And so I can just go in and bring in some sales figures. So I have here a bar chart showing me the total sales per salesperson ID. I have a details visualization set up, which hopefully you're familiar with those. It is it's my number 2 favorite feature of Spotfire. There's 1 and 2 so far. There's a third one I'll mention. And if I select one of these here, let's say I want to know what's going on with, say, salesperson 285. Maybe I can actually bring in their names at some point, but I'm just going to use the ID here. So I'm going to mark that, and I can actually see the details for that. Now, if all I was interested in is knowing information about person 285, I brought in a lot of extra data that I didn't need. If you look here, you can see that we have 31,000 rows potentially, and I've just marked 16 of them, and maybe that was the only 16 rows that I was interested in. So why bring 31,000 rows across the network if I only need 16? Now, if I'm going to be playing around here and looking at a whole bunch of different things as well, then potentially that's not I might need all of that data. But I might be able to bring in just the data that I need by, going back to that idea of reduce, reduce, reduce. Instead of bringing the entire data set across, let's bring in just a piece of it. So I have another option here that I want to show you, and we're going to kind of compare behind the scenes what's going on with this. So this one looks very much the same, but notice here, this has just 18 rows. Technically, or 17 rows are displayed. Technically, there's an 18th row that is those sales amounts that were where the salesperson was not identified. So it's an empty, and I've just filtered it out from this. But I've only brought 18 rows of data across the network. So this is going back to that idea of, can we push a lot of this to the source? So what I've done in this example is I have sent a query to the source that will aggregate just down to those 18 rows. And you can actually see that if we look at our data canvas. I don't have you may be familiar with the canvas here and being able to see the data flow on these. I've actually selected the overview here at the top. And when I do that, and give me just a moment to move my meeting controls out of the way because they were covering just what I wanted to look at, you'll see on this one here, the aggregate import. So I have created an information link that just brings in the total sales. So it basically does a sum and a group by at the source level. So this is kind of another way to push things down to the source when, even if I don't have control over the source directly, I can make that happen from Spotfire. So you'll notice here, and this is a small data set, but extrapolate to this to something with 31 million rows of data or 300 million rows of data. So notice here, the full import, this one here, we have 26 columns of data, 31,000 rows, and in this scenario, 8 megs of data. Obviously, I don't need to optimize this, but again, extrapolate this to a larger case. On the other hand here, the second approach where I have that same bar chart, right? Well, technically the one's in blue, one's in green, but it's that same bar chart there with those same figures. In that scenario here, this is what I've brought in. I've brought in 2 columns of data, 18 rows. Memory usage significantly smaller. We've gone from 8 megs down to 1K. And that's just the memory usage. That's also something you need to think about from optimization. It's not just the load times, but is your web player, if you're using the web player, getting strained with all of these resources? So we've been able to reduce that. Now you might say, well, that's all well and good, but what if I want to come back to here and see those details? You know, if I want to be able to say, hey, again, what's going on here? Why are sales so low? I can do that if the full data set's available. I can do that in Spotfire as well using an on-demand technique. Whoops, I did not mean to switch to there. Let me switch back over here. So here is that full one here. With this strategy, I actually have 2 sources, which you may have noticed here. I have the aggregate import, but then I also have this on-demand piece, which notice at the moment, we can see it has 26 columns, but 0 rows of data. So there is a little bit of overhead in the structure of that, but that's significantly smaller than what we would have if we brought the full data in. So now what's going to happen is when I mark data in here, that I'm in essence demanding the data, saying, please send me that data. So I'm going to mark that, and then it's going to bring that data in. If we come back in and look here, you can see now 16 rows have been loaded. So that combination of aggregating at the source reduces the initial data that I bring in. On demand then allows me to then bring in those extra rows as I need them. You can also use that on-demand strategy up front. Maybe you use a property control and specify perhaps a range of dates so that when you open up the dashboard, it might be empty, but then you specify the date range that you want, and then Spotfire goes out and retrieves just the data from that date range. All right, so that's one strategy. Let me go back to my slides here, kind of going back to what we were talking about with reduce, reduce, reduce. Let's limit the data that's coming across the network. Let's bring that data across strategically. Now, we did talk about caching with respect to ADS, but Spotfire also provides some caching options. So there's everything from caching the data literally in the analysis by embedding the data when you save it. So again, back into here, if I've brought that data in and I now want to save it, now keep in mind, I have the on-demand data probably doesn't need that strategy in this case, but let's say that it's that bigger set with the full however many rows of data that we might have. If I go to File and save this, whether I'm saving it as a local file or saving it to the library, there's going to be an option in the data loading settings that will allow me to either do always new data, and that doesn't work for on demand, of course, but the always new data or stored data. So I can literally cache it in the Spotfire database so that the next time I open it, it doesn't have to retrieve the data. I've stored it in Spotfire. Now, of course, if we do that, then we're going to go back to that conversation about performance and freshness. So, I might need some type of strategy after that to then go in and replace that data source maybe on a weekly basis, essentially recaching it. That can be implemented with something like automation services, where I could add a task that would potentially open up an analysis from a library. Then and I'm not going to go through creating the whole job, but once I've opened it up, I could then replace that data table. So I do have some options that would allow me to recache that within that environment. Another strategy also is to use, this is kind of using Spotfire in a way like we would use ADS, where we could have a dashboard that literally does the data flow and data prep. And then once it's done, we can export that out to the library, and then other dashboards can consume it. So let's say I want to do that here, I can go to File, Export, Data to the library, and then I can choose, which table. In this case, I'll do that full import sales headers, all rows. I'm going to do on this one, click OK, and then it's going to go out and save that. And you can actually see I've done this already. I've got a data file here. I was testing it out this morning just to make sure everything was going to go smoothly. And now I've got this other source that I could potentially use to create another dashboard. And so that Spotfire piece can become, it's not necessarily the best tool for the job again, but gives me some flexibility to do that. And especially if you have dashboards that are using the same data set, we can bring it once into the Spotfire library, into the Spotfire server environment. So again, reducing the number of times we're hitting up the source, reducing the network traffic, bring it in once into the Spotfire environment, and then use it multiple times across. And then potentially we run that process to replace that data table on a daily basis, weekly basis, whatever is appropriate for the data that we're working with. And I'm noticing I'm down to my last little bit, so I'm going to go a little bit faster here. It's also worth noting that things like information links, and I just realized I have data connections on there twice, apologies, but information links, data connections, even our on-demand data or our data functions, these are going to have options that will allow us to cache them as well. So back into here, if I go in and take a look at some of the settings, let's say I want to look at my information link that I'm using behind the scenes for these. If I go to Data Information Designer, and then from here, let me go to my Lunch and Learn and my information links, and let me find that sales order header. By the way, this is the aggregate sales piece that I was using earlier. And you can see here, I've created a separate element called this subtotal ag that basically aggregates the subtotal column from that. And then the overall query on that basically does, select those two columns from that database. I'm not doing a filtering here with the where clause, but I am doing that aggregation with that group by. But if we go into this information link, you'll see that the information links themselves can be cacheable. So I could cache this, and then that way, if somebody else brings up that same dashboard, or even myself a bit later brings up that same one, it can be cached within the server environment, and then we can set it to timeout at a certain time. If we are dealing with data connectors, which I do have an example of one of those here. Let me go to my data, manage data connections. And then in here, I have some data connectors set up here. If I look at one of these, let me just open this up. We can look at the performance settings here. You can allow it to cache and then also set that cache to expire at a particular range, or every so often, every day at the same time, or whatever it might be. So it would, if somebody opens it up once and it loads that data, it will then keep that, and then somebody else again, it would use that same cache data until, in this case, if I chose this option, every day at 4 a.m. it would let it expire. The first load would pull the data, and then that could continue to be used until the next day at 4 a.m. when it would expire. So if you look around, there's a lot of opportunities for that. I kind of anticipated that I wouldn't have a chance to go through all of these today. And conveniently enough, it's almost like great minds think alike. I don't know if any of you follow the Dr. Spotfire channel, but there is one here, and I will see if I can, maybe I can have, when this sent out, let me just see if I can post it into the chat really quickly, or I'll post it at the chat at the end.
And Kelly, there is one question.
Yes.
And it is any best practices for rule settings for report caching in Spotfire? We have been experiencing some issues and want to make sure we are using the settings in the best way.
And if that's what I think it is, scheduled updates, that's going to be kind of my second to last topic. So I absolutely. Just one last note here. If you go out to the Dr. Spotfire YouTube channel, literally 2 days ago, they had a discussion on caching in Spotfire, May 6th. Like I said, we've been planning this for 2 months, so I was really happy to see that. It was very timely. That's an option there. If I'm understanding the question correctly, Amanda, that's looking at one last place where we can cache things. We've talked about some of the different options here. We can also schedule updates in the web player. So if you open something up in the analyst client, it's going to take however long it's going to take. And of course, we have those various caching strategies. Another option is to cache the whole entire dashboard into server memory in the web player. So a common strategy might be for the developers to use the analyst client for building out their dashboards. And then for the consumers of those dashboards, the users that need to go in and get their reports, look up values, or even the developer themselves later on that just needs an answer to a quick question, instead of having to wait the half an hour for analysts to load all the data in, we can cache that dashboard in the web player. And I've got a screenshot of this here. And I may revisit that question in a moment, Amanda. Let me switch into my remote environment. And of course, even though just before this, I was hoping I would get to it fast enough, but didn't quite. We can do this on the web player. Now, your average user will not have access to this part of the administrative console under scheduling and routing. But what you can do is you can create rules that basically say, let me go up to, let's see, what do I want to show on this one? Let me go to my rules here. So let's say I'm going to create a new one. You can create a rule around an analysis to say, load this dashboard into the Spotfire server, or more specifically, the Spotfire node manager's memory every day at 6 a.m. And what that's going to give you then is a dashboard that loads instantly for the consumers. Well, if it takes half an hour to load in Spotfire, it's probably in the analyst client, it's probably going to take a half an hour to load to get it loaded into the cache. But after that, it's going to load immediately. So here, I can choose the analysis, whatever it might be. And you can see here, I've got one already set up. So we're just going to use that one. You can choose the analysis file. You can give this a name. In this case, the rule is sales and marketing daily load. You can select the resource pool. We probably don't have a lot of time to go into that, but there is a whole resource allocation process that you can do around this. That's actually something we've been doing at Cadeon a lot lately. We do talk about that in our performance class, but this will allow you to kind of, if you have a lot of dashboards and multiple node managers, you can kind of find the best way to allocate those dashboards to the various web player nodes and instances that you might have running. And in here, you can then set a schedule. So for that schedule, in this case, I am reloading the dashboard every Monday at 1 a.m. You can also unload it prior to that. So maybe, over the course of the middle of the night, maybe you've got a lot of other processes going. You don't want the Spotfire server or the whatever VM is using that tied up with things. You can unload it, freeing up that memory as well. And then you can tell it to either only load new data at the start of the schedule, or you can update it with new data. In this case, every day it would update. So quick note on this, we would be updating the dashboard with new data every day. And then the dashboard itself gets reloaded on Monday. So if a developer makes a change, say on Thursday, adds a new page, we would either need to go in and manually do that, or it would get loaded in when the whole schedule starts over on Monday. On that, I guess the best practices I would say is really look at your timing, try and find that optimal one. I do think it's important to kind of go back to this, not that, this here. Don't cache everywhere. Figure out what the best option is. And I can't tell you for sure what that is because every situation is so different. Every organization is so different. So you really have to look at the options that you have and find those. One last thing, though, I want to mention because it comes up a fair amount or more than I would have expected. Maybe a fair amount isn't a lot, but more than I would have expected. When you do have those dashboards that are loaded into memory, let me get back into there. I often will run into situations where somebody will tell me, yeah, we have our and it probably wouldn't happen in this case, but our dashboard refreshes hourly and users are complaining that in the middle of their work, they are, everything's being reset on them. So there is an advanced option here that often gets overlooked that will allow you to choose an update method that is manual rather than automatic, so that if a user is in the middle of a session, it won't reset their sessions, clearing their markings and filterings and whatever might be happening there. So I don't know if that explicitly addresses the question, Amanda, but that was, we can kind of dig into that a little bit deeper here. We've got about 10 minutes left. Let me just finish up on this and then we can go back to those questions. But I will say with the caching here, again, there's a great resource there. Look for that. The scheduled updates. It is specifically for the web player clients, so it's not going to help your analyst clients. Some of those other strategies would, but basically it loads instantly. I've seen people's faces just literally transform when they see this. They're like, every day it takes this long for our dashboard to load, and they're kind of, I'm like, oh, let's try a scheduled update in the web player, and I kind of get this, sure that's going to fix things, and it's like then you see it load, you're like, oh my gosh, it's like, the light from heaven shining down above, and bells go off and everything, and you've got this dashboard that's there instantly when you need it. But do think about resource allocation. It is not an easy process. I have been through it myself a little bit with one of our clients, and it does involve looking at, the size of each of these, looking at ways to do that. So I guess that might be one of the recommendations would be really look at things. So if you have a dashboard and you can get insights into this through here, but if you have a dashboard with very high memory usage and it's trying to share a web player with, 10 other dashboards, it's probably going to take over and you're going to see that web player strained and hopefully not exhausted, but potentially having some issues there. We're running towards the end of time, so I'm just going to put one more thing out there that I think is worth mentioning. It's not the focus of everything here, but a lot of this comes down to your dashboard design. It's very tempting to kind of create a one and done. Here's my dashboard. It does everything I could possibly want it to do. And from an application development perspective, that's kind of satisfying that you've got everything there. But it's not always the best strategy for performance. It takes time to load all that data in, and maybe you can improve performance by saying, hey, instead of one dashboard, we're going to have 5. They're each going to be focused on their own functional area, so they only have to pull in their sets of data. So you can partition into multiple dashboards. You can also use a strategy, and I probably won't demo it since we're running short on time, but you can also use a strategy where you use property controls and have one visualization that you can then change the configuration of via those property controls. Because that's another thing to think about is if you have a dashboard where you've got 5 different visualizations on one page, all 5 of those have to render against that volume of data as well. So looking at how we develop our dashboards, how many visualizations, breaking that up into multiple dashboards. You can link from one dashboard to another. We have a client that has kind of like a master dashboard with a bunch of links, and then you click on that link, it opens up another dashboard, passing parameters from one to another using configuration blocks and loading just the data that's needed for that one. So I wish I could demonstrate all of this to everybody. I mean, there's so many wonderful things we can do. And if you're struggling with performance, don't just give up. There's a lot of strategies out there that you can implement to make your environment much more workable and to get those faster load times across, your various dashboards and really make it a lot more user friendly. I unfortunately, like I said, could not demonstrate all of those today, but wanted to give you a sampling of the ideas. I'm going to just put a little bit of a plug in here and then I'll go back for questions. But I will say we have a new course. We have training in fundamentals, intermediate, and advanced, also administration and getting into the data virtualization piece. But we have a new class now that is focused on just performance. It's 1 day, 2 half days. So if that is something that you're interested in and getting into it a little bit more deeper and seeing some of those, that's out there. And of course, we are always here to help you with your data challenges. As you can hopefully see by my giant smile, I love this stuff. Just like everybody else here at Cadeon, we really love working with data and just want to make your data challenges go away and just make it a positive experience for you. So that all
Awesome,
said,
Kelly. We
I'm
got
going to
5
stop
minutes
sharing.
left for questions. Maybe first thing you should do is just let people know how they can contact us if they don't know already. Um, or actually, I guess yeah. So some good discussions going on in the chat. One with Kim or Chesky, or sorry, Kim, if I said your last name wrong. But her question was around tying into Databricks. Um, I think Kim's in oil and gas, so there's large volumes of data. So it's, getting that data from Databricks because it is a huge aggregator. One of the things I think that ADS, that might be a good use case. And I guess one of my questions would be, Kelly, like kind of in an order of magnitude, you can do caching and Spotfire to help, but longer term, if you have massive amounts of data, that's only going to take you so far down the path, correct?
Correct. And that's where you might need to bring in that additional middleware layer that's going to help. So if you can't handle it at the source, and Spotfire isn't always the best tool for the job, and in fact, around a lot of these, I would say it's probably my, it's my last of the go-tos because I think that there's a better place with that middleware layer. But again, we've got options if we need them, but that's where that having, the data from Databricks brought into ADS and managing it within ADS before you publish it out so you can cache it there. The nice thing about that is you have a separate server. So the ADS server, separate from the Spotfire server, it can have its own caching going on. You've got a lot more control over the nuances of that. You have things like cache policies and that help you kind of optimize the schedule for that. The ability to partition and to do incremental caching is much greater. I mean, can you do that in Spotfire? Yeah, you can. In fact, actually, that link that I shared from Dr. Spotfire, I know they talked briefly about incremental caching in Spotfire at the end of that, and there's some resources there. But really, for that type of thing, ideally, you might want to bring it in to that middleware layer with the data virtualization piece to handle that.
And
Hands down.
Kelly,
Oh, go ahead.
Kelly, there's just to finish off, sorry, because I just want to touch on this before we got 2 minutes left. So the other thing that Kim talked about, and Kim, there are, and everyone else, there are third-party adapters for both Spotfire and for ADS. So CData is one of the providers of those. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. Some of those things you might want to look at. So I think there's the natural one. I think there's a better one, Kim, depending on what version. The 14.4, I think there was a major improvement to the Spotfire adapter around Databricks, if I remember correctly. And then finally, because Rita came back to us asking another question. She's like, for schedule optimizations related to caching, any concerns with unloading a bunch of reports at the same time?
That is an interesting question, and I have to admit, you got me on that one. That's not one that I've thought about. I don't know. I would have to look into that a little bit more detail. I don't know for sure on that, and I know we have a couple people at Spotfire that are at Cadeon that could instantly answer that question, and it's just not something that I thought about. But my thought would be that unloading should not be an issue. It's not quite the same as unloading a cache like you might in your data virtualization layer. So I don't off the top of my head think that there would be a concern, but
So let's say this, Rita, reach out to us. We'll get you the definitive answer
there
when
you go.
Kelly's not in the middle of a webinar here. So we'll get back to you. Anything else, Amanda or Kelly, before we kind of wrap up here?
No, I think it
No.
was great, and thanks for doing that, Kelly.
All right, I'm
Okay.
going to stop sharing and
Yes, so thanks everyone. We had over 50 people on today. It was great to see you guys. Please give us your feedback. All this is based on our feedback from working with multiple clients in North America. And, these are some of the common, as Amanda said at the beginning, these are some of the common themes that we're seeing from our customer base where people are struggling with Spotfire. Again, we'll be sending out the June webinar will be coming up soon. June 5th will be our next webinar. That's going to be a bit of a difference. We're trying to do a lunch and learn every second month on Spotfire, and then just do a webinar every second month, so kind of staggering them. But thanks very much for your attendance today. Ask Kelly. Go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing because I saw now that I'm back out of the sharing, I can see that there. So Kim, I noticed that you said that you have problems with them running into each other. You might need to look at kind of your resource allocation. That's kind of that process that I was talking about that we've been using here at Cadeon lately with some of our clients. I think you might find that you might need to look at potentially having more web players or instances of the service so that you can kind of break them up into separate areas. But there is a process that you can go through to identify how much resources are being taken up by each dashboard, and then optimize that so you can minimize those types of things with things crashing into each other. So that might be something to look to. So, sorry,
Okay,
I just
awesome.
noticed that last one.
Okay,
So
that's all right. All right.
that's it.
Well, with that, thanks everybody for your time and attention. Thank you, Kelly and Amanda, for participating in the webinar today. Hope you all have a good afternoon. Take care of yourselves and look to see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye, guys.